Hey friends, it's Christy. So excited to be back with you on the lawnfawn YouTube channel. Today I'm going to be making a card using Would You Be Mine, Totally Awesome, and Year 2. So I've stamped those images out on some Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with lawnfawn jet black ink, and I'll be coloring with my Copic markers. So this is my 6th time using these beavers. I absolutely love them, and I have colored them in a wide range of brown tones from dark to light, but today I decided to go with these dusty browns. So I'm using E42, E43, and E44, laying in some shadows with that E44, and then blending it out with the E43. Pretty much sticking close to the outside edges though, so that I have a lot of room for this lightest shade, the E42, which is going to add a nice highlight in the center of the body, and I'm also going to add a little bit on the belly as well. And then I am going to go back in with a second layer of the E43 and the E42 just to smooth out that blend a little bit more. And then I'm going to move over to my second beaver, and I'm going to color this one the same, just changing my shadows up a bit since this one is sitting up and facing a little bit toward the right hand side. I'm going to do the shadows pretty much equal on both sides. It's mostly facing forward, just a little bit toward the right. And then blending out with the same shades, just starting with the E44, blending out with the E43, and then using the E42 for the lightest in the center of the face and on the belly. And I am carefully coloring around the nose and the teeth, although I'm going to color the nose with a darker color, so you can just color right over it if you want to. And then doing that second layer of those lightest two shades, the mid-tone and the highlight. So I did want to use these shades one other place in this scene. It is kind of the area between the plates on the turtle's shell. So I'm just putting that E44 on each of the points and then blending toward the center with the mid-tone and then a little bit of highlight right at the very center where the sun would hit it the most. And then I'll use E44, E47, and E49 for the beaver's noses and their tails. So I really love that waffle-like texture that is drawn on the tails, so I'm just emphasizing that by taking my darkest shade, the E49, and doing either an L shape or a backward L shape, depending which direction they're facing in each of those squares, and then blending that out with the E47, making sure that there's plenty of room for that E44 to fill in the rest of those areas so they don't get too dark. So I'm just going to color right over the whole thing with that E44, and then you can kind of see that texture come to life. I'm also going to fill in the nose with the E44, so I did skip the E47 on that. And then I'm going to move on to the rest of the plates on the turtle shell, and I wanted to change up my browns a bit. So I'm going with more of like an orangey brown using the E30s, E35, E37, and E39. Although the E37 is darker than the E39, and I forgot that for a moment, so I did have to go back and blend out the E37 once again with the E39. And then I'm going to fill in the rest of that space with the E35. And then I wanted to use these shades somewhere else on the card, so I decided to do my cattails, but I wanted to lighten them up just slightly, so I'm going to add in the E33 and then just leave off the E39. So for those, I'm just starting with the E37, blending out with the E35, and then using the E33 at the top for a highlight. And I kind of reversed which side to put the shadow and highlight on, just kind of depending on which way they were leaning. Then I'm going to bring in YG00, YG01, and YG03 for the turtle's head and feet and tail. I think that vibrant kind of chartreuse green looks really nice with those browns that I used on the shell. Then I'm going to give everybody some rosy cheeks using R20 and blending that out with a touch of R000. And I'll take that R000 and just add a touch of color to the very tips of each of the water lilies. And I'm going to add more to those later on, so I'm just adding just a little bit of color to those right at the tips, like I said. And then I'm going to move on to my wood, and I'm going to use E53, E55, and E57 for the bark, using the E57 down at the bottom to add a little shadow, and then kind of tracing the artist drawn lines with that, just really roughly. It doesn't have to be perfect because it is wood, so it has that rougher texture. And I did the big log and then also the two smaller logs up at the top. Then I'll take the E55 and start to blend that out, kind of skipping over some spaces to leave those lighter, just to add that variation into the wood. And I will fill those in with the E53, just a few quick sweeps of the marker for that. I am also going to use the E53 for the darkest shade on the cut end of all of that wood or the logs, and then I'm going to blend that out with the E50 and E51. And then I did want to just let that dry for a couple of seconds, and then I'm going to go back in with the E55 and add a few little rings and kind of texture lines into that cut end and just trace the swirl in the larger one. And then I'm moving down to my lily pads, and I started out with G28 combined with G07 and G09. But I'm going to end up changing this up because the G09 ended up being a little bit lighter and a little bit more blue toned than what I thought it was going to look like. Actually, the G07 was a bit darker and more of what I wanted to blend with that G28. So I took out the G09 and added in the G05 to blend out the G07. So that one is just a Copic Chow marker because it's one of the originals that I own. That's why it has a different cap, but that is the G05. And then I'm going to do the two smaller ones the same, and that is the same exact stamp. I just turned it upside down when I stamped it the second time to give it a little bit of a different look by putting that little cutout piece on the top instead of on the bottom. For the rest of the grasses, I wanted to change up my green combo and do something more in between that and the turtle. So I went with YG11, YG13, and YG17. So I'm just adding a little YG17 at the base of all of the grasses and the greenery on the cattails, and then blending up toward the top with the YG13. And then I'll fill in the rest of the space there at the very edge with the YG11. And then I'm going to go back to my YG00 and YG01, which were the lightest two shades I used on my turtle. And I'll do my dragonflies with those two shades. And then just add a touch of the YG00 to the opposite end of each of the petals of the water lilies. Then I'm going to take my black Sakura Jelly Roll pen and just go over the eyes of my beaver that has his eyes open to make them nice and bright and shiny, and I will trim these images out with their matching dies. For the background, I'm starting with a piece of Bristol smooth surface cardstock, and I'm going to use the Lawnfawn Cloudy stencil and some salvaged patina distress oxide ink to create a nice sky. So I'm starting on that stencil and kind of adding the pressure more firmly right at the edge and then lifting up a bit so it gets a little bit softer and hazy as it goes up the panel. And then I'll just turn that stencil so I get a different cloud formation and work my way all the way down that panel, just blending that out and making it nice and soft in between. This ink really does blend well on this cardstock because it's kind of like a slicker surface, so it just helps that ink to glide across the surface and makes it really easy to blend on. So I ended up doing 3 different clouds, and then I realized that the rest of the scene would be below the water line. So I'm just going to add a bit of extra ink at the bottom so those clouds are kind of hazy just like the ones at the top. And then I wanted to add a little bit of extra interest by doing some splatter detail. So I'm pressing some of that salvaged patina distress oxide ink onto an acrylic block, adding some water to it to make it a little bit more fluid, and then picking that up with a thin paintbrush and tapping it off the block so I can get a really fine spray of droplets. And then I'll set that panel aside to dry and switch to a piece of mermaid cardstock. I'm going to add some more salvaged patina distress oxide ink at the top of that to darken up that top edge and emphasize the stitching detail. And it wasn't quite dark enough, so I grabbed my Salty Ocean ink blending tool. I didn't ink it up, I just used whatever was left on that sponge foam and blended on a little bit of extra darkness there, and then switched back to my Salvage Patina ink blending tool to blend that out. So while that background is drying, I'm going to work on my sentiment. I'm taking my Finley's ABCs and spelling out the word damn on some woodgrain cardstock, the dark brown color. And I'm just going to tape that into place with some post-it tape, and then I can pop those out of the dies. And then I wanted to show you that I did die cut the top of that using the Stitched Simple wavy borders. And then I also used the Ocean Wave accents to die cut a few extra waves, and then trimmed both panels down with the outside in stitch rectangle stackables. So I'm going to glue the ocean, or the pond, I guess, in this scene to the background, just being very careful where I place that glue because I did want to insert some of my images into these waves, and I'm going to do that right away to make sure that they don't accidentally get glued shut. So I'm just using the glue tube and adding a little bit of adhesive to the back of my beaver. I wanted it to look like it was swimming, so I just tucked it in at a little bit of an angle. Then I'm going to take the large log and tuck that up behind the water so it can look like it's floating on the surface. And then I can bring in the rest of my images as well. So I'm going to take the second beaver and add that so it's sitting on top of the log. And I'm going to make sure to shift it a little bit over toward the left-hand side because the right corner is where I'm going to end up placing my sentiment later on. Then I'm just going to start scene building, adding little images here and there. I usually like to start with my largest images first and then work my way to the smaller ones. So I used the largest lily pad and added the turtle so it's sitting on top. And then I'm going to take one of these logs and add it to the beaver's mouth so it looks like it's carrying this along to add to their dam. And then the other log I wanted to kind of be floating in the water as well, so I wanted to tuck it into another one of those waves. So I'm just making sure that it is going to fit, and then I will pull that out and add some liquid glue to that and tuck it back in. And I'm just kind of pushing up from the back of the panel to bend that cardstock forward to open up those little slots a bit better. Next, I'll take the other 2 lily pads and use those to kind of fill in some of the empty spaces down at the bottom of the scene and then up toward the top right of the scene, and also adding in some of the cattails. I'm going to tuck those in around that log at the very top. So maybe there's like a shore on the other side of the log that we can't see from this angle. So I just wanted there to be some extra little grasses and things growing up over there. So I'm being careful what I put in that right hand side though, because I need to save room for my sentiment. I'm going to take the larger water lily and tuck it back behind the turtle. And then I'll take the two smaller water lilies and add those near the other small lily pads. I like to try to group my images together and create little clusters to help fill in any empty spaces. So now I'm going to work on my sentiment before I go any further because I want to make sure that I leave room for that, and it is a tight squeeze. So I've placed my letters where I want them to go, and now I'm just gluing them into place, spelling out the word damn and working my way backwards so that I make sure that they are not going to like run off the edge of the card. And there was just enough room there. And then I can kind of see from there where I'm going to have a little bit of extra room. So I can take another one of these cattails and tuck it low. So it just overlaps a tiny bit of the letter D, kind of incorporates that sentiment a little bit more into the scene. And then I just took those two grasses and I tucked one over on the far right, and then the other one I'm going to tuck below the water line in front of the log. And then I wanted to go ahead and stamp the rest of my sentiment, so I popped this card front into my MISTI, and I'm stamping using VersaFine Onyx Black ink because I'm working on those distress oxides. And I'm using the sentiment that says, "Have a happy day." And that is actually from the Pool Party stamp set. Then I'm taking some Narwhal ink and I'm going back to my Totally Awesome stamp set. And I'm taking that little dragonfly trail and stamping out one in the sky and then one kind of coming across the pond. So I put one on the right and one on the left. And then I'm going to pop my card base in my MISTI. I'm using Cilantro cardstock, which I've scored and folded to a standard A2 size card. So it's 4 1/4 wide by 5 1/2 tall. And I'm stamping on the inside using Noble Fur ink. And I did the little frog and dragonfly and the sentiment that said, "You're totally awesome." So we've got a pun on the inside and a pun on the outside, both relating to pond creatures. I glued my focal panel to the card front, which gives it that nice little green edging around that almost acts like a frame. And now I can add my two dragonflies to the ends of their trails. And then I decided to switch out that grass on the far right hand side and add another cattail instead. I just felt like it again would incorporate that sentiment a bit more by coming up between the letter M, between the bottom part of it on that right hand side. So I just tucked that in low so that there was enough room for it, and I like that much better. And then I wanted to add a little bit of stickles. Even though this is definitely more of a masculine card, I couldn't resist adding just a tiny bit to the dragonfly's wings and then to the center of the petals of the water lily. But that is going to complete this card, so I am going to lift that up to the camera so you can see all of the detail, catch a little flash of that sparkle and shine, and give you another peek at the inside. I had so much fun playing with these adorable beavers again, so I really hope you guys enjoyed it too. If you did, go ahead and hit that like button or leave me a comment down below so we can have a little chat. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope that you all have an absolutely amazing day. Bye-bye.